opening rule is simple, and it's the reason experienced collectors find fossils where others don't. You don't hunt shapes, you hunt conditions. Fossils are not random prizes scattered through stone. They're the predictable outcome of burial, chemistry, and time. That predictability shows up as repeatable rock fingerprints you can read in seconds before you ever swing a hammer. A rock that preserves life usually tells you it once handled soft tissue and fragile shells gently, or it sealed them fast, or it protected them from oxygen long enough for minerals to take over. Those stories leave patterns you can see. Layering that stacks like pages, tiny ripples frozen in place, cracked networks that map an ancient mudflat, or a smooth, stubborn nodule that feels like it's hiding something it doesn't want to share. Start by scanning for bedding that looks deliberate rather than chaotic. In fossil-friendly sedimentary rocks, layers often form thin, even sheets, millimeters to a few centimeters, like a book you can open. That page-like look matters because fossils tend to lie along bedding planes, especially in shales, thin limestones, and fine siltstones. If the rock breaks into chunky blocks with no clear layering, you're usually in the wrong material for delicate preservation. But if you see repeated, consistent layers, you found the first big green light. It's a rock that records moments, not just debris. Now add the second cue, surface texture that suggests quiet water or gentle settling. Fine ripples can be subtle, low relief, evenly spaced, running in parallel. They're not decoration, they tell you sediment was moving in a controlled way, the kind of environment where shells, plants, and small animals can be buried without being shredded. Even more important is what ripples often come with: thin mud drapes and alternating grain sizes, a rhythm that hints at tides, storms, or seasonal pulses, events that can blanket a surface quickly and lock life in place. But the real hook pattern, the one that makes people stop and stare once they've seen it, is when a rock looks ordinary until you notice it has a boundary. A sharp change, a thin dark band, a rusty seam, a sudden shift from gritty to silky smooth. Those boundaries are where nature switches modes: oxygen to low oxygen, calm water to storm drop, sand to mud. And those mode switches are exactly when fossils get trapped. You're not just looking for a pretty rock. You're looking for the moment the environment changed fast enough to seal a story. Here's the quick field move that turns curiosity into a method. Choose one promising slab and don't break it randomly. Look for the thinnest, most consistent bedding you can find, then test how it wants to split. Fossil-bearing rock often has a preferred plane where it opens cleanly, because that's where the original sediment layers are. If it pops apart like a book opening, you're in the right place. If it shatters across the layers, you're fighting the rock, and fighting the rock is how fossils get destroyed before you ever see them. Layering is the first pattern that turns a random walk into a controlled search, because fossils don't just exist in rock. They exist in specific beds that formed under the right tempo of deposition. The mistake most people make is they see any layered rock and assume it's equally promising. Then they split 10 slabs from the wrong interval, find nothing, and write the whole area off. The more useful skill is learning to spot the layering that looks almost too tidy, thin, repetitive, and consistent. Because that neatness is often the signature of steady sediment settling and quick sealing, which is exactly what fragile remains need. Start with what your eyes can measure before your tools do. In many fossil-rich settings, bedding comes in thin laminae, sometimes paper-thin to a few millimeters, stacking in parallel sheets with minimal disruption. This is common in shales and finely laminated siltstones, and also in some limestones where the matrix is very fine. That fineness matters. Fine grains packed tightly exclude oxygen faster and capture detail like a mold. If the layers are thick, coarse, and cross-bedded like steep little dunes frozen in stone, you're often looking at higher energy conditions that tend to break, abrade, and scatter remains. That doesn't mean you can't find fossils in sandstones, but the odds of intact, delicate preservation drop, and you'll more often find fragments or trace fossils rather than crisp body outlines. Now watch for the rhythm in the layers. Fossil-friendly layering often shows alternating tones, light, dark, or subtle bands where one lamina is slightly more clay-rich and the next slightly more silt-rich. That alternation can be seasonal, tidal, or storm-related, but the important message is stability. A stable rhythm means the environment wasn't constantly churning the bottom. When the bottom isn't constantly churned, shells can settle without being pulverized, plant material can accumulate, and small carcasses can lie long enough to be buried. When you see a repeated pattern like thin couplets, you're seeing time sliced into predictable increments, and fossils love predictable increments because burial happens at the right speed. A crucial detail: look for layers that are laterally continuous. A bed that you can follow with your eyes across an outcrop, staying the same thickness and character, is a bed that likely formed as a broad sheet. Think lake floor, lagoon, quiet marine shelf, floodplain pond. Those broadsheet deposits are where fossils can be spread across a surface and preserved over a wide area. In contrast, lens-shaped layers that pinch out quickly can be channel deposits, bars, or localized events where preservation may be patchy and the fossil horizon harder to track. If you're trying to build a repeatable method, continuous beds are your friend. They let you find the same horizon again and again. Then there's the little betrayal that layering can reveal: disturbance. If the layers are wavy, contorted, or broken into swirls and blobs, soft sediment deformation, slumping, or heavy burrowing, your fossil odds shift. Sometimes slump deposits can entomb material rapidly, but they can also tear it apart. Heavy burrowing in particular is a quiet fossil killer. When worms and small organisms rework the sediment, they erase the flat bedding planes that fossils like to sit on, and they scatter fragments through a mixed zone. In the field, a bioturbated layer often looks mottled instead of striped, like someone smudged the bedding with a thumb. When you see that smudged look, your best move is to look above or below it for cleaner lamination, because clean lamination suggests the bottom went low oxygen or otherwise inhospitable to burrowers, conditions that also favor preservation. One of the most practical tests in layered rock is to read how it breaks. You're not just looking for layers, you're looking for facility, the tendency to split along bedding. In shales, a good fossil bed often splits into smooth plates. That smoothness is a clue that the sediment compacted evenly and the bedding planes are intact. When you split a plate and see a matte, fine surface, you're in the right mechanical zone for impressions, carbon films, and delicate shell outlines. If instead the rock breaks into jagged chunks that ignore the bedding, you're fighting cementation or metamorphic overprint, and the fossil signal, if it ever existed, may be blurred. The other too-tidy clue is microcontrast. A thin, darker lamina inside a lighter stack, or a slightly oilier-looking band in otherwise dull rock. Darker laminae can indicate higher organic content or different chemistry during deposition. They're not guaranteed fossil layers, but they are the kind of places where you might get carbonized plant material, fish outlines, or small invertebrates, because organic-rich zones often pair with faster oxygen loss. Treat those darker seams like bookmarks. If you can trace that seam across the outcrop, and it stays coherent, you've just identified a target horizon you can follow methodically instead of guessing. This is also where you begin thinking like a mapper, not a splitter. Pick a single bed that has the best combination of thin lamination, lateral continuity, and clean splitting behavior, then sample it in a controlled way. Don't take 10 random pieces from 10 different layers. Take a short run along the same horizon, splitting comparable slabs. If fossils are present, the hit rate will often change dramatically by only a few centimeters up or down, because preservation is horizon-specific. That's why tidy layering is such a powerful signal. It lets you stay locked onto one-time slice until you prove it either carries fossils or it doesn't. Most fossil hunters learn the hard way that the most promising layered site can still be sterile if they misread one surface pattern. They see ripples, assume life, and spend an hour splitting rock that never had a stable surface long enough for tracks, shells, or plants to settle and stay. The difference between a true water-made ripple bed and a pressure-made wrinkle can be the difference between opening a slab to nothing but clean stone, or opening it to a surface that still holds a moment of life like it was sealed yesterday. True ripples are a physics signature. They form when water or wind moves sediment in a consistent direction or back and forth rhythm, and that motion leaves spacing, symmetry, and continuity that you can test with your eyes and fingertips. The first thing to check is regularity. In a genuine ripple field, the crests tend to run in long parallel lines, with fairly even spacing and a repeatable height. The surface often feels like corduroy, consistent ridges with troughs that repeat. If the ridges pinch out abruptly, intersect randomly, or look like a crumpled fabric with no dominant direction, you may be looking at a wrinkle texture instead of ripples. And wrinkle textures often come from deformation after burial, pressure, compaction, and subtle shearing, rather than from a living shoreline surface. Next comes symmetry, and this is where you stop guessing. Ripples produced by oscillating waves, water moving back and forth, often create more symmetrical ripple profiles. Each ridge has similar slopes on both sides. Ripples produced by one-way current often have asymmetry, a gentler stoss side and a steeper lee side because sediment is pushed up and avalanches down. You don't need instruments, you need a low-angle look. Get your eyes level with the surface and let the light rake across it. If the ridges cast a consistent shadow on one side and look steeper on the other across the whole patch, that's a real directional story. And directional stories matter because they tell you you're on a surface that once had flow, sorting, and settling, conditions that can bury shells and plant fragments in predictable pockets. Wrinkle textures, by contrast, often betray themselves by their lack of clean flow logic. They can look like ripples at first glance, but when you trace a crest, it breaks, loops, or merges in a way that doesn't feel like water's disciplined repetition. The ridges may be irregular in spacing, tight here, wide there, then suddenly fading. The pattern may have a slightly rubbery look, as if the rock skin was compressed and puckered. That can happen when a fine, muddy layer compacts unevenly, or when pressure solution and minor movement create a corrugated surface. These surfaces can still exist in fossil-bearing rock overall. but they are not by themselves proof you're looking at an ancient living surface. There's a third pattern that confuses people because it sits between the two: microbial mat textures. Some ancient shorelines and shallow flats were coated in microbial films that stabilized mud. When those mats wrinkle, crack, or bulge, they can produce textures that mimic ripples, but with a slightly leathery continuity. The reason this matters for fossils is that microbial mats can be excellent preservers. They can trap fine sediment, reduce erosion, and help seal impressions, especially tracks, trails, and delicate surface traces. If you suspect a mat texture, look for areas where the surface seems unusually cohesive, with small, polygonal, or blister-like features that don't match normal sand ripple geometry. Mat-related textures often pair with very fine laminations and can sit right alongside true ripples, which is why this topic isn't about dismissing wrinkles, but about labeling them correctly so you know what kind of fossil to expect. If you only remember one thing from this video, make it this: the rock doesn't hide fossils randomly, it leaves you a pattern map, and most people never learn to read it. The next time you're out there, don't chase cool shapes. Chase the tidy layering, then challenge the surface texture. Is it a true ripple field that tells a real water story, or a pressure-made wrinkle that's fooling your eye? That one decision decides whether you waste your best splitting window on empty stone or open the slab that actually holds the moment. Somewhere on your next outcrop is a single horizon, sometimes only a few centimeters thick, where the environment flipped fast enough to seal life in place. It might be a darker seam, a cleaner split plane, or a subtle boundary you'd normally ignore. If you learn to spot that mode switch, you stop hunting fossils and start predicting them. The question you should be asking as you walk away is, did I find one today? Which layer is doing the sealing here and what pattern proves it? Because once you can answer that, the next rock you open won't feel like luck. It'll feel inevitable.